So that brings us to the next slide, which is sorry.
Yours working now?
Yeah, I've got it. Thanks, Ash. So that is the WICS analysis is fit for purpose. So in general, Council believes the WICS analysis does not reflect the economics of a future New Zealand Three Waters model, is what I got as the take home out of that. And that was, I came to that conclusion from the results and the comments together. So but I need to do some unpicking here about what the WICS stuff is and what the Scottish Water stuff is.
Yeah.
So the WICS work, based on what they learned in Scotland with the creation of Scottish Water, is what WICS have been applying here to create an economic model, which sits in amongst the water reform model that the government's pushing forward. So, whilst we had councillors with comments around the demographics of Scottish Three Water, so in particular, there was a few comments in there that were along the lines that the Scottish Three Water industry's demographics don't quite meet ours, and therefore it's not same as chalk and cheese. Yep, that could be true, and that might change the edges of what Scottish Water, or what WICS learned in the establishment of Scottish Water. But all they're doing is they're saying, hey, when we set up Scottish Water, we got these sorts of improvements, these sorts of changes, this sort of rate of change, and they applied that to what the government has applied and said, well, we want to roll up into 4. Here's 4 entities, you tell us what 30 years' time looks like for us based on what the experience you had. We are not replicating Scottish Water in New Zealand. So that's just something just to pull apart there. Scottish Water is not WICS. And our Three Waters reform is not Scottish Water. With that said, some of the other comments around the performance, again, this links into what I just said there. Some councillors saw the underperformance of Scottish Water to be an indicator the Scottish Water experience, in my words, is not reflective of a path to international best practice. So again, separating out what WICS does, which is they're just a bunch of accountants and engineers in a room, versus Scottish Water. We're not implementing a Scottish Water model. We just ask them to come have a look at our maths.
12 people sitting in a factory.
Yeah, and it's fine. It's fine for what, and that's effectively what Jeff Swear said, was that's fine for when you're looking at the economics of the model. If they were to overstep it and say, oh, then you need to have this regulator, that regulator in this way, these size entities, and start taking the control away from the government and yourselves, that's where they would overstep the mark.
So I was just wondering, after listening to that webinar on Friday, why didn't WICS use the Victoria model rather than the Scottish model?
No, WICS are a consultancy.
I know, but yeah.
They're not in the Scottish Water Corporation.
No, but but after listening to the Victorian ones the other day,
Yeah.
you know, I sort of thought they might have looked at that model.
It's about 20 years old.
Well, certainly Squares referenced that, and if you read some of the material that WICS put out, they continually referenced and acknowledged the differences in the New Zealand scene. They talked about our renewal, because they got all the data from every local authority in a particular form. We supplied it to them. And essentially they used our figures. Just remember what, as Karl said, this economic modelling, it is a model. It makes some assumptions. Any model makes assumptions. If we modelled, Thames Valley entity, we have to make assumptions. And my impression from reading the material, and Karl, you please feel free to correct me, they were very conscious of taking a conservative New Zealand data-based approach. So they were quite at lengths to emphasise that. Now, the model has to depend on assumptions. Now, as I say, it is what it is. You could test the sensitivity of that model by changing the assumptions, or you could, as Kevin Lavery said, let's not spend 180 billion over 30 years. Let's spend 90 billion. Let's not make the efficiencies gains 2% a year. Let's make it 1% a year. and the model still stacked up. It still came out in relative terms to be less cost than status quo. Now, that's not an advocation for it. That's just simply a statement of models are models, and you have to make a decision on anything. When we, for example, put up a capital work proposition, we model options, and we establish what's called a net present value. So because you have to base your decision on some rationale. And the WICS modelling is not Scottish modelling, it is economic data modelling.
Perhaps they should have called it.
Yeah.
Are we happy with it?
Well, it's not for me to say, I'm just saying it. You can, I suppose if I was to make a comment, you're hard pressed to argue that we can not gain some benefit by aggregation of some form or other. That's not
That's not area and Swiss said it's the magnitude and direction are
generally correct.
accepted. It's just the strength of those. It's the
Correct.
And the benefit, the actual.
so then you've got to weigh up whether that's balanced by the benefit, by the negatives.
Yeah, that's right. Because one of the, as you get bigger, yes, there are some things you're going to lose, and that's why Councillor Gridges said, well, what do Watercare do? You know, what levels of service do they judge themselves against? Now, if you go and look at that data and look at the monthly reporting they do against it, they actually achieve those levels of service, and they're not far off what our levels of service are. So there's an entity with 600,000 connections who are achieving levels of service, because that's an operational, you know, to Bruce, you would have worked in telecom. You change your operations to achieve whatever it is your master or owner requires of you.
And that's where I started seeing it as a benefit, possibly like going on the really other side was then we'll have the possible advantages of those fancy machines that you showed. I was just like, oh my God, actually we could be good, we could be better. And I mean, to say that it's just like, oh, you know, that it's pretty out there, but it could be better than we can offer now. And
well, I think probably the defining thing. But the defining thing for me is the environment is going to be different. It is going to be a different world that we have to operate in. Now,
The regulatory.
and trust me, they'll be tough. And so in theory, you could, an economic regulator exists for a particular region. It says, you know, yes, that investment's worth it. No, that investment's not worth it. Yes, that's a valid case you make to increase this or that or whatever, because that puts tension into a monopoly. Now, they might require, if we stayed as we are, they can still create an economic regulator and make us perform to that. So the operational form of the organisation has to be seen in the context of those environments and should respond to those environments, whatever they are.
And this is where I found it concerning, is this huge risk of obviously what we're seeing now, how much time this is taking up of our other things that we're just not being able to process anymore. That if a regulator comes in, we've got this sort of time managing our own waters, we are going to lose time in everything to be able to do anything else. And that stood out as quite a important thing that you noted in the talks.
Yeah, there's, as there is now, regardless of the changing future, there's an opportunity cost to managing free water, as there's an opportunity cost to managing consenting or any other part of the business here. With the regulatory framework changing and the world changing in the future, that is a consideration. When is there a tipping point where the opportunity cost of managing only 3 waters
outweighs it.
outweighs, I don't know, question mark.
Yeah.
I guess back to the
Sorry.
no, sorry, back to the Scottish Water Wicks thing. It doesn't mean that you guys can't have valid, and you do absolutely have really valid comments about the Wicks model. I'm just challenging us to move forward a step and be a bit more targeted and a bit more nuanced about our approach to raising and the impact of those questions we have. For example, the demographics of Scottish Water's industry versus ours are different. The challenge would be, can we take it a step further and say, and we think that will have this impact on the model, and we think it's wrong or right or indifferent.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm trying to pull the two apart. The fact that Scottish Water are in the BBC News, though I appreciate it was an interesting article, is a bit of a red herring for us, in my opinion. But the model itself exists, and if you want to have a look at it and scrutinise it, we need to take it to the next step and about, okay, what does that mean? What does that demographic difference mean to us? What does that environmental standard difference mean to us? And how has the government accounted for that in their model? And do we agree with that accounting or not? So, yeah, sorry guys, I did get a bit of a high horse about that.
That's good.
So that said, then, unless there's anyone else wants to talk about
Yeah,
that.
so just on that again, so like I mentioned about like when they model it up, they model it also on, on labour not being a diminishing factor, whereas in fact for New Zealand it is compared to over there. So as Deloitte said, they're on 1 to 10, they're on 5, we're on 10. Yes, so how does that impact? And also you look at supply chain, you don't have to look very far to realise now exactly what's happening in New Zealand and the rest of the world and everything else. Like, and so how many years, it's only going to get worse if it gets better.
And I think
So did that come into the modelling at all for Wicks, like for that?
well, that's a great question. I think that's something we've already raised in terms of formulating the C particles for feedback. Last week it was, does New Zealand Inc. have the capacity to deliver on the reforms planned expenditure? And I think with information like that, with we're at 10 and Scottish Water's at 5, and we're basing our Scottish Water's
Well,
understanding
UK are at 5.
Yeah.
British Water, everything, the whole of Britain is 5.
So maybe I don't want to tell you what the figure needs to be, but potentially you could frame something around, well, what impact does that have on the I want to say reasonability, but that's not even a word, about the likelihood that you could actually deliver what the government wants to deliver in that 30-year period. It doesn't actually need to be doubled and deliver that work in 60 years. And how does that impact the affordability argument? That's where I think we need to start taking the conversation. Hey, thanks, Neil. You've been very helpful in helping me sort of formulate these things with your questions throughout these presentations. Appreciate it. All right, so the next slide was no worse off arrangements are appropriate. So from those who replied, generally agreed that no worse off package failed to address the needs of council. And there are a few things coming out of the comments here about why that was. So one thread was that the package doesn't fairly compensate councils for the long-term impact of losing Three Waters. So it was seen as a sugar rush right now, but in 30 years' time, we may still have negative impacts as a result of losing Three Waters. The distribution of the package made no distinction between high-performing and low-performing councils in terms of management of assets.
And that's where I have an issue, because if you think about the councils that have clearly dropped the ball, I'm talking like Wellington City. Now, obviously, they're actually raking more money than they're spending per year. That's why they've only got a 68% debt over revenue. And then on the flip side, then you've got Hamilton City and you've got Tauranga City that are in the 500s and high 500s debt over revenue. So they haven't been rating high enough for it, clearly. So with the compensation, and I've brought this up with Don too, okay, we've been given 17.2, but we are one of the higher performing and diligent councillors, if you like, and our assets, like you heard the Kevin, saying in the meeting that, we're good, we are actually performing good. We've got about 150%, revenue. So in other words, why shouldn't we be? And you've seen what's happened up in Whangarei already, and I firmly believe that we should be coming back at that angle as well and saying, well, we want 50 million or 70 million or whatever it is. We probably can do some modelling around what we think is a good model for that, because why should we be?
This is only their first offer.
Exactly.
We
And
haven't pushed them any further.
yeah, and clearly, there's councils around that have dropped the ball.
Mhm.
And why should we be lumped in with that? That's my thoughts around that.
So just for clarification, there's two payments here. One is what they refer to as stranded overheads, and that's 2 years of one-off payments.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, $500,000, is it?
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about that one. I'm
Right, you're talking about the next one.
Yeah. So I'm
which is-
sorry, the next one. Yeah.
The next one, yeah.
But this one's the same though, Don, because
Yeah.
it's a longer term thing. It's
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, we will have some one-off costs, but we'll have some ongoing costs.
So even as, like when my comments were, even on smaller councils, those people that some of them leave to other jobs.
Yeah.
They don't just do that job.
No, that's right, exactly, yeah.
So
That
Yeah, no, I agree.
Bonds and
I agree.
everything,
Yeah, no, I agree. It'll cause a bit of pushing and pulling around the organisation over that 2 year period as we adjust to things, but in a way that's looking at something in a very singular, siloed way, because inevitably, and this is a prediction, I will predict that any council who chooses not to be involved in, chooses to be involved and allows its water and wastewater day-to-day management and operation to go elsewhere will fill a vacuum. Because you will, and it's not a criticism, you will suddenly see your rate bill go down by $1,200. All right? The fact that somebody else is picking up that, it's a bit like the electricity company.
and your entity bill go to 3,000.
Yeah, but put that aside.
the rates will catch up very quickly.
We
Yeah.
won't care. We will not care.
No, we don't. No.
No, their argument for those people is with the water company. Just like the argument for electricity, which used to be locally owned, run by trusts,
Yeah.
paid for through your power meter, when that went into aggregated
Yeah.
entities.
That's when the price went up.
Yeah, well, yeah, but to be fair though, Ash, a lot of the reticulation in those days was pretty damn shambly and poor. And the electricity industry was ripe for that reform. But my point being that when we're setting rates, we don't care what the electricity prices are. We talk about affordability.
Well, we
and
compare it, don't we? We turn around and use them as examples.
Yeah.
Like we say, hey, your rate's at 2,500 a
Yeah.
year, aren't bad
Yeah.
when you're paying 3,600
telephone.
just for your
And
electricity.
telephone. And telephone services.
One comment on Facebook of that. Some said, oh, that's good, my rates are going to go down.
But once we lose control, my point being that once it goes out off our books, we'll suddenly say, oh, well, what are we going to do now as a local authority?
Build playgrounds.
No,
We're doing that anyway,
Pirate
Will,
ship.
despite your best efforts.
Pirate ship.
I just-
Yes, I understand, I'm only teasing. I'm only teasing.
And suddenly, and I've made this point before, and it's not meant to be any reflection on anything, but if you continue to be a water and wastewater provider council, you will deal with and talk about and focus in a different way to somebody who doesn't.
Yeah.
That's,
Kevin, you'll get your stage, mate.
It's interesting your comment about filling the
We've got a
vacuum
context.
because, the rates will go down for a person in town by $1,200. And so by vacuum meaning that we'll just put our rates, that we're going to increase our rates. We won't.
Well,
It'll actually be
I don't think we will.
worse for the farmers.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Because the things that will be rating on, like more, will be things that go through the general rate.
Exactly.
let me put it another way. it will be your choice as to what you do.
Well, it'll be worse on the farmers from our, but as a broad outgoings for the household, it won't be any worse.
Well, we when they get the entity bill.
Yeah,
Because at the end of the day,
Yeah,
that's
but you
your
don't know
payment.
yet. You don't know
In
yet.
terms of particularly,
You do.
well, I understand what you're saying, but
But a lot of stuff
doing
goes
it
on
at
the
the
general
household,
rate.
The stuff that we spend a lot of it on.
It's general rate,
Yeah.
On the
And
general
the
rate.
capital value of our land.
yeah, no, I understand all of that, but I'm just saying from a what's going on in the household.
Yeah.
It's no, it's the same.
But the, come back to the $17.2 million, did they have a formula for that, by the way, Karl? Can you-
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
they
they,
did.
they applied the same formula as they did with the $5 million reform stimulus payment. So
Deprivation and.
Okay.
there's a bit of deprivation, there's a bit of asset value, and there's population size.
And there's area size.
Blue areas and red areas.
Because South
Population.
It's
I
always-
don't know if I totally agree with you, Don.
Don't you?
No, because
I can
in respect of you create, filling the vacuum,
Yeah,
because,
I was perhaps a bit facetious.
yeah, and it depends what the government are going to give us to do
Yeah,
in their reforms and what have you of local government and what they might have us doing. But you're going to be hard pressed as a council to fill that by effectively putting a percent, because if you apply it on a percentage figure, all right, it would be quite significant and you'll get bloody.
yeah. I wouldn't say you do it as a one-off.
No.
You know,
It'll slowly.
creep. It'll be
But
creep.
I've got,
There'll be creep,
my
right?
concern is these stranded overheads.
so we've done a
I
calculation
would-
on those.
I'd say it's something that will be sitting stranded for at least 5 years.
Yeah, and the government grant, I think, is for 2 years. And I think we'd estimated our stranded overheads at a really rough high level order of about 900,000. So,
2 year or was it 2 years?
per year.
2 year.
So that's about, I think it worked out to be about 2% or something like that, something in that order.
And you apply that for, not for 2 years, but 5.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're in that environment and you want to control your costs, you would have to look at something. Something will happen. I mean, you won't incur all of that. I mean, suddenly we might say, well, look, we don't need a depot out at Waiho. Let's sell land. Let's come in here. Let's put our works depot here. Because we're a lot smaller workforce. Karl's building
Yeah.
where he is at the moment, we'll give that lease up. We'll give,
That's where we're quite lucky.
Yeah.
But we haven't got everybody in a big building here. That's where your stranded overhead sits, where people have everybody in one building, whereas we've got us off-site.
Well, Thames Valley Electric Power
Power
Board
board.
essentially abandoned that.
Yeah. And so we can, that would be eventually,
And of course, they went down the model of paying out everybody as a shareholder. So they raised debt, paid people out. Who paid the debt off?
Or a sheep.
Same people have got the money.
The electricity consumer, exactly.
and it's the
Sold
same
the
thing.
shares
And it's the
straight away.
same thing happening with this.
Well,
Sort of.
that's why I can't quite get the argument of people who argue that the entity should buy our water supply,
Yeah.
because they'll simply go out and raise debt. And
consumer
then
will pay
the people that
twice.
consume water and wastewater services will have to pay it back. And a portion of this is exactly the same. $1 billion of this, or $1.5 billion, is debt that the water consumer will pay back.
So that was, sorry to go back to the slides. So
I'll just go to James if you.
Yeah, well, it just relates to that. It relates to this slide. Like, what's the philosophy behind the 17.2 million? It's not this idea of purchasing the asset, is it, Dom?
No,
So what is it?
it is a sweetener.
Hmm.
It is a price.
But what do they sell it as?
They sell it as, I don't know, but here's some money you can use to keep yourself occupied. And
So when it was announced, the supporting information around it was that this money is to be spent on community good and community welfare projects. Its funding actually comes in, you get a quarter of this cash when my reform funding expires. So my March 2022 explosive money, when that disappears, you'll get a quarter of this money. And then the remainder of the money will only come in 2024 when the entities are up and running and going forward. So the intention is not to spend any of this money at all on Three Waters, even though it's being talked about in the Three Waters conversation. It's about giving you guys some cash to do some stuff that you want to do. It's as you say, it's a sweetener, so you can go put a new stadium in somewhere that you really wanted a stadium that you never had the cash for before, but now you do.
Playground.
I could throw a party.
so yeah, the cost of that is just the difference in interest rate.
So there was a question that I had a couple of meetings ago about that money, and I was told that it was specifics.
Yep.
But basically, we could twist it to
Oh,
the way we wanted to. So we could use it
Yeah.
for.
Well, my recommendation was use it as an internal bank.
Yeah.
That would be my recommendation.
In saying that, one of the comments, one of the threads of comments coming from councillors was there was some hesitancy because there's yet to be announced strings. Well, there's a perception that there are yet to be announced strings with this funding. And that might hamper or limit, those requirements might limit the actual value of this funding to council.
Do you think that's right, or do you think that's a bit of gossip?
I don't really know. I don't know what it's going to be in the future. I just know that it was, if you were to get something similar to our reform stimulus funding, it was pretty hard to fit the box. But I'm not close enough to the conversation to know whether that's likely.
Okay.
The wording up to now is you can do what you like.
No,
It was about 3 bullet points.
and it also,
Pretty much.
iwi have got to be involved in the spend of it too. Indications are.
I hadn't read that.
No, I've heard that.
Yeah, but have you read it though? I mean, I think.
You know, there's a little couple of bullet points there.
Is that, yeah, no, that's fine. I just,
Yeah,
not,
it is
I'm
what
not knocking
challenge.
it. I'm just trying to get a handle on whether this is a gift or whether
Yeah,
it comes with strings.
It comes with strength.
Yeah.
So I mean, like the first tranche comes with strength.
So, yeah, for this particular one, I mean, obviously it's around getting, in my mind, it's about throwing everything we can at it in terms of maximising payment and maximising the freedom to do that. Although I prefer Dom's idea of setting up a sovereign fund, much like you promised. But really, that's sort of in the negotiating space for me rather than a go no go thing. Yes, there are some things that we need to unpack, but at the end of the day, this is. I know it's 17 million, but really in the magnitude of what the reform is going to be delivering, this is pretty minor. And it's not of course, we'll be pursuing it, I would imagine, if that's the avenue we go down to maximise our freedom and maximise the amount of money that we get. But it's not a go, no go thing for me. Yeah. Sorry, Karl.
It's only about 1% of their
Yeah, I mean,
total spend.
for me personally, it's huge, but I'm just saying in terms of the magnitude
Yeah,
of what it is.
I think we've got scope to maximise that too.
And we should.
Yeah.
We should.
I'll try to dig out those 3 bullet points as well. It's all in the rest of the stuff.
They said it's going to be fit for purpose and flexible. And I stood up and asked them, I said, you told us the first tranche money was flexible and fit for purpose, which it wasn't. So why would we believe that?
So we'd go hard on it, of course, but I don't see it as a go, no go factor.
Yeah, it doesn't affect my opt-in, opt-out.
Yeah, basically.
No, definitely not.
So the other one that was sort of shared, the other comment which was shared between better off and no worse off was the appropriateness of a funding mechanism behind this money, that some of it comes off the balance sheets of the future entities. So I think the underlying question there, which I did take a bit of a gamble on, the underlying question there is, was it appropriate for entities set up to leverage their balance sheet to deliver benefit in the Three Waters space to actually be spending their money on non-Three Waters projects in effect? So the following question here was about the ombudsman. An ombudsman to independently investigate, will that improve the model? And there was, as you can see from the results, there's general support that a ombudsman should be included as part of,
How's he going to keep up with it?
as part of Three Waters model. Yeah, that's
She,
low.
She,
she,
how's she going to keep up with it?
they'll have an office.
This would be 150,000
So,
people working on it.
It's an ombuds person.
Possibly it's a matter of who cares, that's their problem.
Ombudswoman. Ombudswoman.
Another government department.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
use, yeah, they use
Hey,
the money.
Expanded a
Another
lot.
couple of floors.
15 training cases today.
Yes, okay.
15 odds.
Pretty good, eh?
Okay, so with all that said,
15.
like I did, I've tried to come up with a straw man to sort of bring it all together for you guys to chew over. So the straw man that I've come up with this time around is it reasonable to suggest from the results of the two surveys, so I've tried to amalgamate both, that it would seem that the majority of councillors believe there is a need for the New Zealand Three Waters model to change to some greater or lesser extent. A future New Zealand Three Waters model should include the management of stormwater and would benefit through the establishment of a water and economic regulator. The purpose of the proposed governance arrangements in the government's Three Waters reform model lack accountability to the customer. However, accountability in the Three Waters model may be improved through the inclusion of a Three Waters ombudsman. So that's my straw man for you guys to sort of put together, have a look at, have a think about. And like I said last time, it's just a seed particle for you guys to chew over.
So, so my question to the councillors, that last comment, yes, because I was negative on that ombudsman because I think it's too late anyway. Watching my wife deal with the banking ombudsman as I do these days,
Yeah,
is directly accountable to her.
I was just going to say what you're
Speaking with her personally probably twice a week. By the time it gets to her, it doesn't matter. Like if it's accountability, it's too far gone.
Right. It's like the last
That's just
It's the last.
end, isn't it?
Yeah. So like, it's just, I mean, do you think the banking ombudsman does anything or the electricity ombudsman, do they actually do anything?
It's more systemic problems they
Yeah.
have any effect on. But if there's a repeated individual issues, then they have a view and can influence systemic changes, not individual claims.
It's more about the regulators than
Yeah,
it is about the ombudsman.
Yeah, so I guess the key word there is may be improved. Yeah, so.
we've got some suggestions for improvement if Karl wants to go.
It's a matter of
But
getting.
yeah, the regulator is the critical, the regulator is the bottom line at the end. That is where the stake sits, two levels of. You're either
I don't
complying
even
to
know
your
if I go trying to say may be improved. I don't
So
know, a waste of time.
is there a view, just to try and starting to form a collective view, is there a view
touchy subject.
that
Play-Doh out.
some form of aggregation would be beneficial to address future demands?
Yes,
Okay.
and I think on a regional basis. Makes
Okay,
sense.
that's fine. Yeah, we don't forget about the region.
We're not being-
Forget about the matter of principle. Some form of aggregation, because aggregation can take many forms.
Should we do a show of hands?
Where we had said it 2 years ago, that's my question.
That's not correct.
Exactly. Exactly.
Ours isn't.
No, so we wouldn't even be looking at it 2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, but
Show of
the
hands.
difference from 2 years ago is there's going to be a new regulatory environment. So 2 years ago was in a fair comparison. As of
The
right
regulatory
now,
environment's
knowing what
different
we
to
know,
aggregation.
And they're trying to correct issues throughout the country.
And a regulator would do that.
The government is looking at it from New Zealand Inc. perspective, not Matamata-Piako.
Yeah.
They're trying to give us a Skoda and we want a BMW.
I guess I'm also interested that we've got no problems here. Like so we won't triage any issues around Morrinsville. Like, is everything fine in Morrisville? Because
We don't, we don't we don't have any water assets in Morrisville.
Yeah, it's all about it.
yeah, no. So why are we spending so much time about Morrisville? Like, I mean, this is what you're telling me, Morrisville.
Even Karl will tell you, we are perfect.
No, but
Have you moved?
I live in the country, so Matamata's water is horrible.
That's true, James, too, but also, like, you know, as I said the other day with water care, if Hamilton City hadn't given them their water care's great model would be down the chute right
Yes,
now.
indeed.
And the thing that really stuck to me when I said was in the Zoom I said to you guys last week, if anyone read that 20-page report, you'll see that they reduced their environmental flows over 3 of their dams. We can't even get to do that. Looking at all that information you get from Lockerbie that I got the other day and read through that, the frustration of Morrisville is that the regional council are holding us to account now for so long, and yet in Auckland, and that's why I agree that like the problems we're getting are not of our own volition.
right, so but the Timera Dam bypass, whatever it was, we weren't compliant with that for a number of years, and there were still water problems. So we can't. Don, did we actually have the flow correct that we were legally required to from the Timera Dam for the last 5, 6, 7 years? No, we didn't, right? And the regional council was okay with that. So there's a regulation there. We couldn't comply. We didn't comply. There was still water shortage problems for Morrisville. So you can't put it all on the Waikato Regional Council. There was actually a structural problem with the supply. Anyway, I'm going to continue listening to this.
If we can just leave that statement on the table, that there is agreement that some form of aggregation will be beneficial in order to meet future demand.
No, could be.
There could be.
Were we going to do a show of hands?
Not at this stage.
No, why, there's no point.
That's a pretty general
Who
statement.
agrees with that?
That's a
I
general
think this is
statement.
what
Do you agree with that statement?
let's see which way.
Ash, do you agree with that statement?
What's that?
The one that Don just said?
No.
Right, so there we go. So maybe a show of hands would have been useful.
And as Adrian just said, just some,
Well, I just wonder whether entity B, out of all the entities, entity B, while it's large and geographic, we don't have the issues of Auckland or Wellington or Hastings or Palmerston North. I took that on board that, you know, how bad are our issues? You know, if there was an entity to be in, we're probably in the right one. I don't know. It's just, yeah.
We've got some other modelling here. So
Yeah.
But
And just going back to something James said, under a new entity, in a drought, we're going to say that Morrisville won't run out of water or have restrictions. I don't think there's any
no, I
town in
think,
the country that doesn't have restrictions.
okay, so it's always difficult. It's always difficult for, in any advice I'm giving, please don't think that I have a particular perspective or point of view. It's just simply to
No,
to
it's a
jump.
question, yeah.
climate change is a reality.
Is it?
It is.
So weather.
We are getting droutier droughts and wetter wets.
I like that.
The regional council have done us a study which models future climate change effects. I've asked them to treat the Morrisville supply because it's our most sensitive supply. There's no doubt. We retain water in the wet season, and for the last 2 years we've had, and the farmers all know it. In fact, Adrian's commented to me about it. We've had extraordinary dry summers and winters. Unknown to us, 1 in 120-year events, 1 in 200-year events. Now, if that is to
Coupe
be,
told you that.
big pardon, but I mean, the reality is that to provide resilience to those types of things, and that was Auckland's problem. Auckland stores water in the wet season. It wasn't getting enough. It just wasn't getting enough. And so you need capacity to deal with that at both at NZ and Inc. level and at sub-regional level. It's just we can't fight the fight on our own. That's in that because these events will become too much for us.
So that's that nagging doubt in the back of my mind, or question in the back of my mind. Could entity B, or would they be able to wield a bigger stick to get what we need in Morrinsville quicker and better than if we're just being little Matamata-Piako doing it? And that's that nagging,
Influence. It's
Yeah.
about
that's that nagging
influence.
thing in the back of my mind about that somewhere along the line, I know that somebody who's a bigger, would be able to grunt and whack a bigger
Too
stick.
big to fail. Neil.
Yeah.
That's the
Like,
thing.
and that's kind of like and I don't like feeling like that, but I know that it's.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
my.
They will have intellectual grunt. We were talking about supply chains problems before, very real. Remember, one of the options for a large entity is to have its own workforce, in much the same way the electricity department did in the former days, and not deal with going to market and bidding prices for various capital work. So that is an option to secure supply chain solutions that's not so influenced by day-to-day fluctuations in the market. That's what size does matter in some of these things.
Last night, sorry, I'm not trying to steal that.
No,
Last night I watched the news and the builders that were complaining about having a shortage. And the first thing I noticed was I didn't see Genuine Homes there. I didn't see Signature Homes or
they'll
Golden
have
Homes
deals
there.
wrapped up, yeah.
I saw the guy that's self-employed for 30 years and another guy who's been on his own. And I know what's happening at the moment is what will be happening is with the houses will be going up. The Genuine and that are all flying ahead and all the other guys are all waiting in the queue.
Buying power.
Buying power, you know.
Let's look after the biggest customer.
Quantity.
So we get run over by regional council in terms of consents in the
Yeah.
past, because the effort for us to fight it, it's extremely expensive process, to get a consent. You get a big entity that's got real firepower in the sense of its intellectual grunt and the ideas it can put forward and the trade-offs it can provide. Of course, they're going to be more influential in that space. That's just the reality.
And that's where the amalgamation, like, I know we've talked about the valley, the Thames Valley, is when you put it together, that's when you get your offsets and,
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's
where
right.
it becomes one entity.
That's right. You can buy the farm down at the estuary and
Mm.
if it was just Thames Valley though, our cross-subsidisation liability
It'd be horrendous.
would be even greater.
Well, Erin highlighted that with
Yeah,
TCDC.
yeah, and Hauraki have got $30 million worth of wastewater to do.
You go to Bruce and you can keep,
And you can offset that, of course, on the fact is that
oh, sorry, Russ.
Matamata-Piako, or Morrinsville, right, is still going to be a little fish in
in a big
TB anyway.
Mm.
And so the Tarongas and the Hamiltons are still going to have priority over us.
Yeah.
But it won't be regional, it'll be entity B.
I'm talking into TB.
I know, but I'm just saying,
I think that's one of the key issues, Bruce, which we'll come to later, is consistently right across the country, it is concern about influence and
And
accountability.
being, dominated by
That is dominating a lot of conversations.
Yeah, I agree with Bruce. I was messaging Paul Blair, who is the ex-CEO of NZ Infrastructure, and he believes that entity B is in the best position to take advantage of what's going on. We have a lot going forward for us, and we can push back and likely to get some concessions, if you like. He believes that this will go ahead. Whether they'll mandate it or not, I don't know. But I mean, that's one of the risks for them, I guess. But yeah, as the ex-CEO of NZ Infrastructure, he believes it's going to go ahead, and we're in the best position in entity B.
Russ, just to change tack a little bit, so we're doing these surveys, we're having all these workshops. You only have to see the feedback on Facebook, the phone calls, all that,
Yeah.
and you can, 99% of it, the public don't want it. They want to opt out. So we go through all this, we make a decision, we then go out to public consultation, they come back to us and say no, or they come into the boardroom and say, we'll be looking for another job next year, or what,
But I don't think we've been asked to make that decision now.
No, the one time we're going through all this, and we can listen to everything that's coming out, we can discuss it, but then is the public gonna really understand what we're understanding.
No.
But,
I'll go to see.
Oh, no, Adrian wants to.
Oh, sorry, Adrian, I can't
sorry,
see
you
it.
can't see it.
Lift her up a little bit.
Yeah.
Adrian.
I was going to say that the challenge with that is the public don't know what we know. They're still thinking that iwi
When
is
we
stealing the
first
water.
Yeah,
The government are giving iwi the water. When, as Don said, it's about the pipes and the infrastructure. It's not about the water that flows. So that's one of the single things that comes up, is that it's going to iwi. And that's where the misinformation comes into it and what it all means.
But the makeup of the governance board is exacerbating.
Yeah,
That's what's driving that.
yeah, that's the thing. It's,
But this is where we need to get some of these things like Karl's, this is where I see a slope and that come, and when we can come to a position, then we can go out to the communities and say, this is it, this is what's proposed, you know, and this, like I keep banging on, this is what I'm so pissed off about, is because it's been such a shitty presented proposal. We need to get down to the facts and figures and then take it out.
Thank you, River.
And go from there, you know, because, yeah, and this is why I'm looking at all up in arms, because the information is full of it.
The next thought, at the moment, is that even if we accept what is right and the communication that has come through from now is so damaging that I'm worried that there is not a way to come back and go, actually, there may be some benefits for a small council like ours or a council, because it's been screwed up from day one. Absolutely screwed up. And the Facebook people and the comments, they don't know. And it's got all screwed around. Mr. Mayor from Westland hasn't helped.
The libelous ads on TV haven't helped either.
No.
Not the ads on TV haven't helped. It scared the hell out of people.
Yep.
And so how have we gone too far that we can bring this back, you know, in the public eye?
Here's where I sit. Do I believe that we need to spend 185 billion on infrastructure? No, I don't. Because they told us for the first 6 or 8 months that it was between 70 and 96 billion. Then they found out that in our long-term plans, councils have actually got 81 billion. So it's covered over the 30 years. So what do they do then? They say 185, blah, blah, blah. We've had another think, 185. It's all bullshit. Sorry, guys. It's crap. If someone talked to you like that in the street, you'd have no credibility for them. The next thing is the propaganda ads. Telling our public, and they say that the public like the ads. Have you ever come across anyone in the public who like those ads? Oh, I don't know what planet they're living on. So then the slime's coming out the thing. We've got to focus on our area, not the whole of New Zealand, Matamata-Piako, and that's where my interest is, and it's for my ratepayers. For us to say, yep, we'll take it off the rates, people will be happy because the rates go down. Of course they will be. But are they going to be happy when they get their first water entity bill?
That's right.
And I'm telling you now, when they kick up about it to the new water entity, the first response from their mouths will be, your council left it in such bad state, we have had to put your water up to this. And so combined, just like Aucklanders will tell you our rates are lower than Matamata-Piako. You add their water rates into it, all of a sudden they're not. And this is what the reality for me is. And this is why I'm struggling with it as it is. I'm not saying whether it's a right proposal or a wrong proposal, but I'm saying based on the information we've been given, and none of it's credible, I can see where they've got the economies of scale in Scotland, because the sewage going into the waterways has increased over the last 5 years by over 40%. So, I don't know, but it's taken up.
But we're hearing that side of it, not necessarily from you. We're hearing that talk, and we're not perhaps hearing the talk that there may be some benefits for us. And I guess
Well, they've ruined that
yeah,
presentation.
and that's how far have we
So
gone?
how do
Have
we
gone
believe
too
it?
far? Have we gone-
Where's the actual facts and where's the figures? All we're hearing about is, yeah, you guys play along and you'll get 17 million.
Can you back
You better
off
take
the Karl's on full slide?
It's
It's hard to get- once he gets
I can tell you, because this is really good stuff. I mean, I don't want to leave, but what I was hearing is that there's a credibility issue with the government and how they presented this because of the ads, because of the changing numbers and the way it is. I guess the question is, back to this council, how important is that amongst the mix? And if it's important enough, how to communicate that and potentially what resolution we would like on that? Maybe it's a request of, hey, actually, if you want to fix this credibility issue, government, then maybe the timeline needs to be longer so we can do a reset. Maybe, I don't know. That's for you guys to decide.
Yeah, and can I just say one more thing? And the other thing that really irks me, and it's the water bill that's going through Parliament at the moment, and it's the threats they're giving us. And it's the threats, and we've seen it up on slideshows that we'll be issuing out $200,000 infringements for, if you don't comply. We'll be prosecuting your own workers personally as well. Those are threats. And I don't respond well to them, I really don't. I'm not that person, and these are the things I don't like about it. I hate it. If they, I don't know, I just want to.
So I get the feeling that you're okay with the statement that some form of aggregation to a greater or lesser extent is supported for future demand.
And we could quantify that through buying power,
Yeah.
influence,
We
consenting.
already do it with waste and stuff. I mean, it makes
Yeah.
sense.
There are,
We're not saying what, we're not saying
No,
what, we're
yeah.
just, that's as a
There's an
general
opportunity.
principle.
The word is
I don't actually agree with that, because you get these big entities, look at us as council. We go out for a price and we pay twice as much as anyone else, and these new entities are going to be the same. I'm sorry.
No, I don't think so.
I do.
Yeah,
I
Because
see.
I've said it's guaranteed money.
well, when we bid, we get three prices, they don't collude to ratchet the price up by 10%.
There's some big
Maybe
differences.
over a beer they might.
Yeah,
Why
yeah,
why would they charge us more?
they just know. We're gaining.
But is that where there's an opportunity because of a bigger entity that there's staged, because the thing is we get caught in a queue. And as a bigger entity, you know that there's this, and this, and it's one business and we've got this work to be done.
Yeah.
Isn't there that power, that influence, that buying
Exactly.
power?
So the consistent message around the country is there's not enough reassurance in this opposition and the governance model,
Yes.
reassurance that where's the owners, because you've said we're the owners, where's the owners can influence these entities in a manner that is potentially important to our community or communities.
Or that things happen in a timely,
All the things that, yeah. So I was quite taken with the Tas Water presentation, and I know Ash and I both had a problem with the fact of where they started from, and anything would have been better.
Yeah.
Tasmanian Water was pretty crappy.
1,000 litre pot of water would have been better.
Yeah. But it's a CCO model. Each of the councils has got a shareholding, they give a dividend, which is just another way of taxing people, but
Yeah.
that's fine.
that's right.
But they clearly spoke very well of the relationship, or the mayor that was present spoke very well of the relationship they had with Tas Water. They felt that they were listened to, they felt that they had influence, and I would acknowledge that being a shareholder creates a different dynamic to not being a shareholder.
Exactly.
Right? Okay. Go for that.
So if we had profit sharing, it would be different.
Yeah, well, as I say, if you're going to corporatise the company and pay the local shareholders, one of the concerns around that was that it potentially will achieve such a value that somebody will turn around one day, a council will turn around one day and say, I want to sell this.
Right.
because it's worth such a lot of money.
But isn't it the consumer that's paying that
Anyway.
anyway?
That's right.
Again, it's,
Yeah, it is. But what I was trying to build up to is whether or not there's some improvement in the model that could be proposed that would give you greater influence and say. I mean, over there, it seemed like they met every year and signed off a 5-year works program. They have regular meetings throughout the year between their shareholders and the board. Any mayor and chief executive can gain access to the CEO and the chairman of the board and feel like they're listened to. And I suppose, in a sense, that's what's missing from, if you like, the spirit of this model. Because if you felt like you could send Ash and I over to see the CEO of Waikato Water to get a problem in Morrinsville addressed and that we were listened to, well, that would be great, wouldn't it? So how do we create that situation?
because the
We have a
fascinating,
CCO. Stop looking at Scott.
Oh, well, it's an alternative, yeah.
so the fascinating thing about that would be that we've all been involved in the waters now, we have knowledge in that space. Roll on another couple of electoral terms where a lot of us have gone. What are those people going to know about water?
So
Don will be consulting still if he's lucky.
I hope so. I hope so.
We did it
Purchase of goods.
at BMW and, yeah.
But yeah, that's where
It's
starts
a
to
really
change.
good point, Adrian, because I have put it to somebody else in writing just recently, that what we need here is a bit like when Fonterra got created. If I understood it correctly, the shareholders of Fonterra had a deep suspicion of what this new company was going to do, and this board seemed so remote from the day-to-day activity on the farm. But what did you create? You created a shareholders council, whose role, as I understand it, was to hold the board to account, to provide independent views to what the board decision makers do and take them to task. The trust has been won, as I would understand it, the confidence in the company, the way it manages its affairs, albeit there'll be criticism.
Apart from a few hiccups.
So the principle of what I'm trying to say is that are there some interim arrangements that bridge that gap between what we are now to what will be the situation in 5 years' time, when if trust and confidence is built up, then probably no one will care.
Exactly.
That's that key, it's the trust and confidence.
Correct.
That's the two.
Which is not there at the moment.
Right, that's my point. It's gone.
And it all goes back to the key principle that people just want to turn their tap on,
Yeah.
flush the toilet,
So
and
Taz,
and their house not be
Taz
flooded with
Water,
rain.
if you want, it's quite funny. Taz Water, one of the questions from some elected member in New Zealand said, what public consultation would you undertake? And they looked quite perplexed.
Yeah.
They said none, because we still owned the water and all people cared about was the water coming out of the tap and the toilet being flushed.
So what percentage would we have if we were to own part of Entity B?
We'd have to look at that, but we could work that out.
Better than nothing.
And what percentage would we have if we were to own part of the Waikato Regional Council?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
That's the one that would be small.
Another way of doing it, could you go to the next slide? Was that one way you with your draft governance model?
Oh, okay, yeah. So,
This is because it's topical. And I thought it was this one. Okay. So in this model, Karl has, because it says influence. Sorry?
do you want me to explain? Sorry, Tom.
You explain.
So what I did was, based on the survey results and all those little one-liners that I gave you about where I thought the results landed, I rebuilt the entity structure to reflect what you guys were saying. So what you got up there in the top left box is you're saying, yep, there'll be local government involvement, but you want less than the 22, the entity B. You're not interested in those two middle steps to selecting the board. You want direct appointment with the board. And you said you wanted an ombudsman, and everybody can complain to the ombudsman, and they can come down to the entity and talk to the entity. And you've also wanted wastewater and stormwater all going to be part of the entity. So that's what the restructure of that is. So sorry, Don, but that's how it was put together. Continue.
No, I agree. So what this demonstrates to me and Karl's proposition here is that rather than being two steps away from your ability to decide or vote for a particular director, you have, is there an argument to be made that local government should have a direct ability to vote for a director? But further to avoid the situation where all the directors get voted in from Taranaki or the Bay, have a ward structure where there must be two coming from the Waikato, or four if you count Matamata-Piako. And
That's another one.
yeah, that's right. But
That would even out.
That would be based on an ETB in its current 22 though you're talking about.
yeah. But it could be regional, same thing.
Yeah.
You could have two from the Thames Valley, two from the Central, two Manawa Whenua from the Thames Valley, and two from the Central. Remembering these directors should be professionally qualified to be directors.
Yes.
They're not managers.
Elected members or.
They are directing
Governance.
the organisation to achieve particular outcomes. So I thought this was quite a clever summation of the concerns that Karl put together.
Whole bunch of tridents.
And now they may not agree with it, but does that form the basis of saying we are worried about influence, and if this is going to go here,
That level of governance.
we want some ability to vote directly for their directors, not vote for point. The other thing we talked about was whether you should have an ability to make appointments to the consumer panel so that you had direct representation in that consumer panel level.
Yeah, there needs to be, so we don't have to have shareholding as such, but there needs to be an ability to have a say.
Yep.
And that's where the accountability.
Exactly, because
We're not having shareholders.
Yeah.
Why not? Because that's what the public are concerned about.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So why not have local ownership, be local ownership?
But what does local ownership mean?
Yeah.
Well, for them, it means that they own it.
Yeah. I wonder if you could have a share of some form that recognise the value donated, but it's not a realisable value.
Because, I mean, we're sitting here in 30 years' time, somebody's sitting here, and Matamata-Piako merges with Hauraki, Watkins and Grata. So then they've got something Grata in this as well, because this is only the start.
I'm beginning to see that, like for the Thames Valley example, that there's a lot of risks around Thames Valley because we're actually the
big enough for
stronger.
them to go for anyway.
No, but we're strong. We're one of the stronger. Whereas at least if we're one of the stronger across with other stronger, like it's the weaker ones are similar. Like the load is
Toss them to the wolves.
I don't know.
But I quite like John's thinking around having some input into who represents. That's critical.
You wouldn't go so far as a CCO?
Oh, well, yeah, that's up to you, but I think it's a valid point of view to put for a number of reasons.
And
You
then
could
if
still
there's-
make them. You could still make them now non-saleable.
Yes.
You can still require referenda.
So does the CCO then charge the same across the whole area, or is it charged for saying?
Well, that's
Economic
that's a story still to be told.
Because that's where, if it gets shared across everybody, then you've got cross-subsidisation occurring anyway.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we will.
And are there greater risks that way than there are that way?
Well, what they argue is, irrespective of cross-subsidisation, that it's still cheaper than standing alone. Now, believe it or not believe it, that's their argument.
But that's the problem. You've got to believe it. Mr. Dewbest.
I don't disagree with a lot of the stuff that's being discussed here. What we're not addressing is that this is government policy. And it's driven by a desire to have iwi involvement in water. And they've changed the wording of it from being, 6 from one and 6 from another and what have you, to one where it says now it will be jointly appointed and all sorts of things. This is on the selection panels and what have you. This is simply a Labour Party policy to involve mana whenua in control of water. And, we can, I'm quite happy for us to go back with all these suggestions and what have you, all right? But that's the underlying thing, and that's what will determine what Minister Mahuta puts to her cabinet.
One of the cornerstones of her proposal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's-
It is
if the people speak on another level and another way,
And that's why they won't let us go off.
and this sort of system
Oh,
is
no.
what
Yes, they will.
the people want,
But
then
so be it. Yeah.
who is she to go, well, no, sorry, we're going to do it this way.
He will just go.
No, I'm saying I don't disagree with what we're discussing here. I'm still saying this
It's like policy.
this what we're coming up with is not addressing the underlying factor that is in the formation of this Three Waters reform. And we don't realise what's well, if we don't realise, we do realise it. We're just putting it to one side. We're not addressing what I think is, and I'll tell you right now, if governance structure is basically similar to what they're proposing, I can tell you now that I won't be supporting it on that alone, whether there are other issues, right? Because it is a underlying belief, as far as I'm concerned, that water is owned by New Zealand. There you go.
Karl, over to you, mate.
So,
And you're doing a bloody good job, Karl.
Yeah. Can't think of shit yesterday was so bad.
It's all good. It's all good stuff.
and so there's the antitrust situation, right?
Again,
I don't trust
Well,
them.
I'm not pointing at you, I'm just saying there's
You
the,
put it at me.
there's the problems that we keep, there's the problems that we keep having, is that we keep spinning around to the,
And they've
the,
created
To the political environment.
political lack of trust, not against you, but you know what I'm saying?
I think I could be
Political
confident.
agenda.
I think I could be confident in saying that if the National Party were in power, they would aggregate
Yes.
water site
Correct.
supplies. This was their policy. Now, I spoke to Lawrence Yule, who was National Party spokesperson for local government at Taupo, and I said, what would you have done, Lawrence? He said, we would have put them into 12 or 13 regional entities. So the principle of this reform, putting aside involvement of iwi or not, the principle of this reform is support on both sides of the house, in principle. Now, National understandably want Labor to do all the hard work. Of course they do. Why wouldn't they?
Well, it was like when Labour with Prebble and Douglas
Yeah.
years ago.
So
I voted McKillicuddy because I couldn't. Because I couldn't vote for Labor.
Sorry, Don.
No, that's all right. No. And I don't think the ACT Party will vote against this. I'd be surprised. They'll make hay and mischief around the compliance costs for rural properties. And in actual fact, the regulator is trying to address that, but no one's saying that. He's trying to suggest that all rural properties or suppliers under 50 people will simply have a means of compliance. In other words, stick a UV treatment thing in there and an inline filter, keep some records, get your instruments calibrated once a year, send the data in, end of story.
None of your consumers have to die.
Which I do none of at the moment. I don't
Yeah,
have
that's
a
right.
filter, don't have a filter, and
That's
and
right.
I don't have a water
And
meter.
Fonterra tested water to say.
But I have a QCons tested water to show that it's free of E. coli.
So what, all I'm trying to illustrate is that you may think that's unnecessary, but the government policy frame is that where more than one household is on a water supply, there should be some processes in place that give confidence that that water supply meets a certain standard.
So a QCons test saying that there's no E. coli because that gives me the ability to use the water to cool the milk should be fine.
But
So
and they may, I don't know. Maybe
no, I don't know either.
So you
But
might
that's the
find-
risk of red tape.
So
Sorry.
you might find that you'll get some farmers that supply water to livestock blockers and they say, nah, out of here, you can do your own thing.
Oh,
And there'll be a
absolutely.
lot of-
That's
There'll
what's
be
been
actually a lot of
highlighted.
water suppliers
Yep.
will say, we're out of here, you do your own thing.
So I suppose,
And it's up to the water regulator, like the council, to.
yeah, only if we opt out.
So I guess the feedback there is that we think that the rural water supply issue
Yeah.
needs to be
That's
handled
fair.
in a different way,
That's fair.
take more time,
Spot on.
don't rush into it because of the complexities around rural water
I
supply.
don't think they'll do that though, Adrian. The reason I say that, because I think you'd find 95% of councils would then opt out. They're using that as a fear, very much so, because they're saying if your rural guys can't get those things, then it'll land in council's things, so they will not do that.
So therefore, they need to just put a handbrake on everything.
But going back to James's question though, he'll be able to purchase your UV and filter system from the Don McLeod UV and Filter Supplies Limited Company.
Honest Dons. Honest Dons.
So the
Don's drinking water.
Yeah.
contribution there
Container
is,
from China coming.
if you opt out, why would the water entity want to be involved in stuff in water supply within your area? If you are the water supply provider for that area, then it's all or nothing.
And unfortunately, with the regulator, that's where we get left with the rural supplies, like you said.
Yeah, that's right. But I think, but don't get me wrong, that's valid concern to say, hey, this is over the top. I'm going to put a moratorium on this for 10 years, get everything else sorted out. Is there any great problem? That's a valid
And
What do you do
set
to
the
express?
standards for the rural areas to get themselves up to speed.
Can we ask them for the names and addresses and phone numbers of the 34,000 people that got sick in New Zealand every year from drinking the water, please?
They all live in
So
So that's another fairyland story.
Privacy Act.
Who's trying to sweeten us all up with chocolate?
So no, leave it there.
Stop handing out chocolate.
The person you can't see.
It's so.
Carry on, Karl, you're doing a good job, mate.
So just run through the other side of things. I put them together for you guys. You might as well have a look at them. So this was about the Waikato entity itself. So luckily for us, as part of the WICS work, they actually did a bit of bonding on this on pretty much the Waikato boundary there. So there was not a gain as entity B in this, and I've highlighted the lines in there. You'll notice, what's the number there? 1600 or something, is it? 1660? No, 1800 is what the water price would be if you compare that to. Yeah, sorry guys, my address went over again.
You put Bruce.
I'm at my, I can see you. So here, so the average cost per connection at the moment, so that the average water rate would be 1,820 today, and that would expand up. This is without reform. This is what they said. It will go up to 4,000. But what you want to look at is the other column there, post amalgamation in 2051. It would be 1660. So the current entity B proposal, which government's put in front of us, only has that number as 1220. So it's, in some ways, it's not chalk and cheese. It's not several thousand more. It's only $440 more based on the modelling. So just give you an idea of, maybe not absolutes, don't take the numbers absolute, but ballpark. You know, it's not a super huge difference between entity B as being proposed and a Waikato.
So that's straight away, is it? Sorry, I can't read.
That's 2050.
350?
Yeah, 2051. So
So
30 years.
that's an inflation proof figure, obviously, not a.
Yeah.
That'd be an
So-
increase in value.
Yes, that's inflation, investment, economies of scale stuff, so all the efficiency stuff. But the point I think I was trying to at least make was that it's not huge difference.
Yeah, one's 1220, one's 1660.
Can you run by that? I don't understand it.
We're
Yeah.
just
Straight up.
Yeah, I didn't explain it very well.
It's all good, but it's per connected citizen, so that's per person in the house, is it? Is that what you're talking
Can't
of?
be.
Yeah, so it's just as a term, it's a Scottish water term because of how they run their industry
Right.
in particular, but it's rates. So the average rate, so column one there, outside the red stuff, column one is across that entity B, the Waikato region, the average rates for water is 1,800.
Right.
If we don't do a reform, again, they reckon it's going to be 4,200.
Yeah.
If you reform and your reform is an aggregation into the Waikato, then you could drop your rates to 16, right? So 1060.
So can I just, so that's us now, the 1,060.
No, that's us if we reformed today. So
Okay.
say all the Waikato got together and all the magic happened with the amalgamation.
To all that
1060.
pink area.
Mine won't play.
So
Yeah.
so
That pink
the
area.
challenge here, Mirash, is that they're using averages.
Yeah.
So we happen to be, and there's a slide later which demonstrates this,
Oh, okay.
we happen to be below the average, all right?
Yeah.
So this is talking about an average of all the people in the Waikato.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now I get it because I was looking for us. That's what I was
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. No, that's cool, mate.
So for example, in the Coromandel, I've got a feeling it's around about that figure.
Like some Oklahoma crap loads and Hamilton face shit loads. We less than that. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
actually-
we have, I don't know, what's ours?
And so I'll do the next slide then. So luckily for us, also they, sorry, Ash,
You're right.
double tap there. So luckily for us, they actually did this graph as well based on the Waikato. It's actually a different modelling scenario, but for us, the Waikato was still the same. So what that's showing there is those lines. Don't worry about exactly what the lines are. The lines are the average cost. So that's meant to be the line that the entity would follow. The Waikato entity would follow in terms of costs. And the dots are where actual prices are today and then forecast actual prices into the future. And you'll sort of
So
see,
where
very
are
hard to see in there.
We're here,
So that's the average cost here, Carl, is that
Yeah,
correct?
the line is the average cost.
That's when we sit below the average, right?
We actually look pretty good.
2030, we would still, in theory, sit below the average. And in 2050, we would be below the average.
So the point there is that if you average them, right, obviously those below the average subsidise those above the average, right?
Yeah, so be careful that's
You better go back to Tim's comment with.
I thought, and again, it's all up for your own interpretation. I thought what this showed is because we're so middle of the pack, maybe we're slightly behind the average, but we're pretty middle of the pack at the level of cross subsidisation that we'd expect in terms of actual dollars flowing out of the district to everybody else is probably pretty minimal. Just at a bit of an eyeball based on the graph that Wix produced.
So looking at this, really, this is what we should be talking to Hamilton and Waikato about in particular. Because then convincing them that, that if they come along, we all go along the same boat, not much of a difference.
Well, maybe that's a reasonable and appropriate submission to make, to say that any cross subsidisation should be held off.
When you look at
For a period of
Waitomo is
time.
the smallest, and, like in reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like the number of people in that area is
And when you look at that, you look at Hauraki, Thames Coromandel, if we wanted to be joining with those.
yeah, we wouldn't want to be there. That's right.
That's what I said, the risk.
No. That's right.
And you follow us, we're not bad at all.
Part of these slides were to sort of talk about the cross subsidisation question which had come up. The previous slide was sort of a more information for you guys to hopefully make a decision at some point about whether you want to include an alternative model, a suggestion of an alternative model as part of your feedback to government. You know, in this case, a Waikato model is not so much bad, it's much worse in terms of portability, and you may tag on to that, but it gives us all these things that the existing model doesn't give us. I mean, you guys have to find out what that means for you. You still may want to say, actually, nah, we just want to respond, but based on the government's proposal and do nothing. It's still a valid answer too.
I still can't think that their time frame or timeline is going to work. The government,
That's the challenge.
that's just.
That doesn't matter because they'll just push it out. They can do it.
I think where we might end up, and I think they do it I think they did it somewhere, I just can't remember where they the entity contracted back to the local authorities to carry on until they sort of themselves out.
Karl, can you go back to the previous slide, please?
Just jump to the next and go back.
Yep. So how many entities was this? This is about
This is
one, two,
This
This is regional council.
No, entity B, and it's the 22, isn't it?
yeah, but only eight.
no, so
No.
the terminology is all different.
Let's
So-
get him wrong. This entity B here is effectively
Waikato
region.
Yeah,
Correct.
It was coincidentally called entity B.
That's where I was getting screwed over before,
Yes.
because I was looking at it,
Yes.
it said entity B,
Yeah.
and I thought, well, that just happens to be the one we're in.
Just have to look at the map and see
Yeah,
if
so there's
Taranaki not included in
There's
the
eight
base. not included.
entities.
Oh, yeah.
What I'll do is I will send you guys, I'll send you guys the links to these as well, so you can see them in the
Actually-
online version.
Actually, if you get a chance,
Yeah.
when Karl sends you the links, just read through there's a few pages of words, flick through them up until this modelling. And well, I found it interesting. You may find it completely boring, but it does put some context on it.
That's a picture.
it gives you like there's about 15, there's 30 of these, I think, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think there
There's
was
a lot of them.
30,
Yeah.
30 different models done, eh?
Yeah.
So there's 30 of these available and they to have a look at each one differently. And so, but this one here for B is you know, it's not splitting everyone else into regional councils. I mean, it may be a better go for us to push because it's good for us. Auckland still goes with Northland, so politically for them it's quite good, and leaves you with like cuts basically E and C out of us, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the next one was 13 entities?
Yeah, it was 13 entities, but you don't need to worry too much about that difference. Where's my presentation? There it is. You don't need to worry too much about that because the graph only shows you what's going on inside the orange blob,
Yeah.
which I think has now changed its name, but thankfully it is still the same Waikato region. So the name's changed, the total numbers are different, but in this case, it's like for like, thankfully.
Yeah.
What happened if we put D in that slide and C in the other slide in?
The
Oh, no.
together.
You could go back, because
Wonder
the
why
the
can it
numbers
back then?
change.
Because Taranaki is quite small.
So
isn't it?
if we put C and D, which is kind of a geographical fit,
Yeah, there's 30 of those you can get. So
Okay.
in one of those things,
Okay.
one of those pieces of paper that we've been given,
Yeah.
there's 30 of these different
okay.
scenarios.
Yeah. but just-
So is B just the best for us? Karl?
I'm not sure it's a case of best or worst.
Yeah.
You guys decide what's best or worst. I just think what I'm trying to show is that dollars wise, I guess it depends where you think $440 is significant. But I'm going to say dollars wise, $440 difference between entity B has been proposed, the whole 22 councils versus the Waikato Council. Is that
Is that
significant?
worth
That's where you
feeling more comfort?
the two words then that I read about that guy was talking about is the difference between efficiency and effectiveness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you've got to say, okay, so we feel that, yeah, this is more effective
Exactly.
and it's not as efficient. We accept it's not as efficient, but we feel it's more effective. Because
Exactly.
then it suits us because that's our catchment. That runs to the Taupo, runs to the thing.
Yeah,
That's our stormwater area.
right.
You want to put stormwater in, that's our stormwater area.
Yeah.
That's our rivers, that's our bloody.
So for $440 more, based on your figures, we believe that's worth having these benefits.
And would mana whenua agree?
Well, that would be
And
a
that's
lot
it,
more
because-
And
comfortable.
that's the thing that
And
yeah,
that's who we should be getting in the room with us, is we should be getting those guys in the room with us and Hamilton as well, and then saying, look, this is what we need to pitch.
yes, because the reality is that iwi compete against each other, and when you bring in all those iwi, how the heck are you going to have six?
And the point is, if we're going to pitch it, we have to do it quite quickly.
Well, if you agree that that is a proposition worth making in your submission, we would make that submission, but I would then backfill it with lobbying with those entities and seeing if they will support your submission, because there'll still be channels open to the government in terms of communication.
I mean, that would be more what Tainui, that was Tainui in a whole thing, isn't it, really, pretty
Yeah.
much?
Because to me, if we don't pitch something that works for us, we're going to get what doesn't work for us.
But it is important to bring the iwi along with us, because if we haven't got iwi agreement, then we're basically not.
We can do that.
Well, instead of
This is where we
22
live.
councils, you're dealing
That's
with
a good
11 or 12.
To get the 6.
I mean, but consciously you're saying, hey, we're getting, as Neil said, I think that's a really good analogy. We may not be as efficient based on your modelling, but we feel we'll be more effective because of.
It fits in with your parliamentarian.
Yeah, hey, we've got established relationships, we can win the trust and confidence, blah, blah, blah.
And it's our community of interest
Community of
almost.
interest, yep,
It's a term that you could probably
absolutely,
use.
for things such as
Community
economic
understanding.
development outcomes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hamilton might get a tourism.
yeah. So, does that sound like a bit of a goer?
Yeah.
I think it's a way forward that we have to
Yeah,
look
I
at.
think that's something that would be. Can we own it, we don't, we don't. We own that, it's our CCO.
Yeah.
Well, the thing
Yeah, don't make a pitch for a
Because the
CCO.
interesting thing then is with regional council is that if it was a goer, then we have a regional Waikato water entity bidding at a regional council, and it's
Yes.
1-on-1,
Yeah,
whereas when you've
That's
got,
aligns with the regulator, yeah.
And if you talk to the regional council people, they are very nervous about where they fit in this whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was
They
gonna
said
say.
next to
They
their
have to share as well, because they've got stormwater.
No,
Like,
Yeah.
we don't know what's going on
I know,
here.
they're
Yeah.
quite
all the drains.
Yeah, that's right, they've got all the drains.
They can buy themselves.
So I guess it's all about knowing what the risks are,
yeah,
and again, that's that extra cost.
yeah, yeah.
But there's still efficiencies because it's,
Shorter communication lines,
yeah,
Yeah,
we
It's a
can still
cleaner.
work on a spoke, hub and spoke model.
Hamilton's
We're talking
the
logic.
head office, Hamilton's a logical head office.
Yeah, absolutely. I would see a
We're
sub-regional,
not gonna get nothing.
Yeah,
I would see a
I
sub-regional
know.
office to be in Te Araha.
Get that from, get them off that.
Tees Valley, and it's close, it's still close
Stop it
to,
through your concrete, mate, or we're
No, we've got, to me, that's always been my, I mean, you know that I've always thought that. But the other thing is that I still believe that we should have 4% or 8%, I think we get, a few regional stuff, we get 8% is about normally what we get,
That's right.
I think so. I mean, I think 8% is better than no percent.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
because it's like the airport, you know.
Yeah.
Between all the little guys, we own enough just to say no to Hamilton.
Yeah.
Because Oklahoma had that last 3 or 4%, just like we don't like it.
I was going to say, Don, with your idea about Te Araha being the Thames Valley,
Yeah.
is that because we have that building separate to council,
Correct.
there's a line of
There's
separation.
infrastructure there that they can.
That, and it's independent of district council, the local body.
Yeah. Good.
I feel comfortable. I feel a bit more.
But it's still at the same time, the timeframes we aren't happy with.
No.
And, yeah, the whole process that
Well,
they've undertaken.
I think they need to strengthen their transitional arrangements, and even if it was for a period of time, to contract back to the current local authorities to allow that transition to be, to avoid complete disruption.
And I sort of feel that they've gone top down instead of bottom up.
They
Like there
have.
has to be a bit of both.
Yeah.
And they've forgotten to
Yeah.
actually take the bottom.
Trying to see them in a good light.
Grassroots approach.
Maybe they are looking for this from us.
And I
Trying to see
genuinely
them in a
think
good light, sorry.
they are
Chris.
genuinely trying to. I think if you attack the Manawa Whenua thing, you will get a real pushback on that. I think the thing for you to focus on is to just leave that to one side and say, well, look, that's not.
My way of thinking about it is that, like, okay, we own it, but if we have to have 6 people on the board and they have 6, so they put together for the 12, but we still own it, they still have a say in it. I don't care as much as I own it.
Well, the role of the directors, of course, is to run the company well,
Right.
not to determine.
But wasn't that the representation? Was 6 and 6? It wasn't the governance, it was the representation.
No, that was the directors.
Oh, still equal directors as well.
Yeah, but if we owned it,
Yeah.
we can live with it.
Which
But you
is
wouldn't have
what we do.
12.
In theory, we do, but I think what Neil's saying is that must be more apparent,
Yeah,
must be
the
more
shareholder.
overt.
Because that's what people are worried about, eh? They want to have.
When I think about it, why would having a share be a problem? Oh, no, sorry, you're not allowed to reflect it on your books because that
That's
was
right.
constraining. So how can we separate it from our books?
Devil's advocate here, you could say, well, that's your problem. There's a million different financial models all over the world. Can you find another one?
And the other thing is also prove it to us on the ones that you've redacted that it doesn't make any difference. Because Standard and Poor's, everybody else is still saying that
Standard
we're
and
still the
Poor's.
levels.
I think they're exaggerating the risk of a democratically elected board to the credit rating. I think that's just a bit of a, well,
Yeah. Well, the stuff I read, it's like we couldn't even see that because it was like, it just said like the difference between AA, AA minus and BB plus.
is that going to cost you credit that much more? I don't know.
Yeah. So how many are on the water care board?
Don't know.
So it's easy to find out. I
Yeah,
think it's
yeah.
about 6 or
I was
something.
going to say, 'cause you wouldn't want any more than 7
Yeah,
on
I think
board.
it's
That'd be.
Well, they say the proposal says up to.
And we're pushing for the same thing, just like they've got, because that's what Phil Goff wants. He still wants to have to
Yeah.
set the policy.
He does.
And that's what we say. We want the same thing. We want to still be able to set the policy.
Policy.
And then we want those guys to enforce it.
If I was advising government, I'd say give that for 5 years and then have a review period. Because you'll build up the trust and confidence that the company does it right, and then transition into a new environment if the shareholders agree.
And once, it's easier to move through.
And so we need to get some of the heavy hitters around us and on the same boat.
As it turns out, our area under that is actually the Waikato region.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
it
the top two, Northland and Auckland, would go together.
Yeah.
And, the biggest one, the
So
ones
how-
down the east coast, west coast.
How do we get the heavy hitters together?
Well, I would recommend that near Ash, once we put our ideas
Ash, are you
together.
happy about this, though? Are you
No,
sitting on
that's
your
my-
horse or are you getting off it or?
No, I'm still probably be on my horse, but this is the model I'd rather go down.
Right.
Definitely than the 22 energy, because,
Yeah.
you know, what do we have in common with Taranaki, Whakatane, and
Correct.
22
But
is
you,
just
you
too
would,
big.
you would feel comfortable?
More comfortable.
And
more
that's an
comfortable
8
with
too.
that?
That's 8, which is like, it's not 13 or 16.
Mm.
Either. So like for us, that's like, you know, and then that cuts Taranaki and Wanganui and them together.
Yeah.
The interesting thing would be is that, I guess, you know, you can say we're being selfish because we want the best for our regions, and it's where it leaves some of the others is the fascinating part, but
Well, it is Wellington water, just about where Wellington water is.
it's
Wellington's the only area, by the way, who doesn't financially benefit particularly by a particular amount in these reforms. Wellington would actually be quite happy to stay on its own, and even the model says that they're
Well,
okay.
of course they would, because they're rating 122 mil, they're only spending 80, so they'd be happy. Yes, carry on.
the
like that.
developers have to put tanks into the let shit go in the middle of the night when there's.
Donna, I think the public will be happier if we gave them a better story. Well, they're
So
going
you
to
might
understand a little bit more. The comments are coming through.
There's
Used to
roughly
be
95% of them don't want them to sell our.
If we keep a
If
share.
we
of it,
keep,
we've got
if
to
we keep the
a
share as a
That's right.
CCO,
Yes.
We
that's
have
it,
to
it's
keep a
just
share.
like the airport.
Solves the
CCO,
whole
yeah.
And I
problem.
can say to people, hey, it's just like
It's
you,
still-
you know, we've got shares in the airport.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, we need to do
And
that.
we've got to be to say that it's got
It
some
becomes
say.
Waikato.
Yeah.
Because in the current form, it's handing over the assets. I can show you an email came in today from the
That's right.
person,
Yeah.
and the same thing. I'll read it out. if you
No,
like.
no.
He's coming on a daily
Yeah, it's
basis.
Jenny Harrison.
No, please don't. Please don't. Any more, Carl?
Karl, can you make up sort of a drawing then on what we're sort of talking about, like having the ownership being ours for CCO, but mana whenua as well, appointing people to the board?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
I can
like,
draw heaps of stuff up and have a look at it.
but you know what I mean, though, eh? So like, yeah, I'm quite happy to have them having a say in the direction, but if we're still, the CCO's owning it.
Yep, so I'm sort of, wait, let me go, let's back up a couple of
How
images
much
here. So I'm thinking, so maybe move mana whenua out to the side above the green boxes on the right-hand side there, so they can still set policy directions.
Oh,
No, I kind of want them to be
Are they selecting?
selecting as
Oh, they're
well.
selecting, okay.
Yeah, but the ownership being like ownership, local ownership going straight down from there, boom, into the orange box being the owner.
Okay,
You know what I mean?
yeah, I'll
Which
give
in
you
theory
some,
we are now, but we just make it more overt.
We're making it, we're actually like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we are, but.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
worst case scenario, I can just chuck you some, I'll draw some up and I'll chuck them to you and you say, yeah, that's what I was thinking in my head.